Lydia, where are you from? Where were you born?
I was born in El Rancho, close to San Ildefonso Pueblo.
And when was the first time you went to Los Alamos?
I would have gone there in '43. I worked as a babysitter, and I also cleaned house, some houses. I remember the Fermis, I worked with them, and they had a daughter named Nella and Julio, and I became friends with them. They were a lot younger, and they lived right across from the Gordons in a Sunt apartment, so they were just right across the hall from the Gordons.
And then you returned to high school to finish high school?
Then I went back to McCurdy School, and in the summers I worked. I was older then, and I worked at the lab. And then I worked at South Mesa, and we worked with the soldiers on wax, working with explosives. I was a junior technician, and in September, when it was time to go back to school, I went back to McCurdy, and later on I went on to York College. After I came back from York College, I worked in the Zia housing office, and the MPs were leaving about that time, and we processed 300 civilian guards that day. So I was at the lab for 42 years full-time. I worked there 3 days a week as a lab associate. And now I'm retired, but I have many fond memories of the very early days at Los Alamos. When we homesteaded, we would plant a lot of corn and squash. We had a cistern that held the water. We got the drinking water from the canyon where they have a skating rink now. And when the government took over the ranches at Los Alamos, my brother and my dad went to pick up their crop, and they were approached by an MP on horseback. He stopped them and checked to see what they were doing up there, what they had in the truck, and that's it.
When you first went to work at Los Alamos, who interviewed you, and what were the circumstances that you went to work at Los Alamos?
Okay, I remember I talked to Irma Schuler, and
did Irma Schuler come to El Rancho?
No, I went up to her office. And then I went to get my badge, and I was badged by a WAC. And she said, what does Irma Schuler think she's doing? I never really knew why, but I went for an interview to go to work in another group, and the man that interviewed me said, I see you started working at the lab before you were of age. And that's what the WAC was complaining about, my age, going to work before I was of age to be there.
And when you first went to work at Los Alamos, how did you get to work at Los Alamos?
Okay, we went in Army trucks.
Okay.
They would come in the morning and pick us up. If we knew the soldier driving the truck, he would stop at our house first and pick me and my sister up. But if we didn't know the soldier, we would have to ride in the back, which was a very bumpy ride. Yeah.
Okay, and the trucks were driven by Army?
By the military, the MPs.
MPs would drive the trucks?
Yes.
And they would take people from El Rancho to Los Alamos to work?
Yes.
And where were you assigned when you first went to work at Los Alamos?
Well, they had the housing office close to where Fuller Lodge is. And all the maids would go there, and they had people that drove us to the different homes. We never knew where we were going to work, so we were all over the hill working for the different scientists.
In their homes?
In their homes, yes. Yeah. I did a lot of babysitting. I babysat for the Tellers, and who else? The Gordons, the Critchfields. Yeah.
After you were a full-time employee at the lab, then you worked as a technician.
I worked as a junior technician,
And
yes.
what was the group number then?
Well, as I remember, it was X7, but now they have another X division, but it was X7 as I remember, yeah. And we worked with the military, wax, soldiers. I worked with explosives. My job was to be at a microscope measuring the diameter of some wires that were soldered on these plugs that would go into a detonator that would later be filled with explosives. And I had little boxes color-coded. The microscope was color-coded, so it was easy just to look and see what diameter, just put it in a box. And, yeah. And then one time the soldier went on furlough, and they assigned me to do his work, which was working in a building quite far from the main building. And I washed some, they called it PETN, as I remember. And then I would put it in an oven and bake it, take it out, sift it, put it in little jars. And when he came back, he took over his job, and I went back to my microscope.
While you worked in the technical division, did you have any idea what the work was all about, the end result? Did you know anything about that?
We had no idea. I know when I was living with the Gordons, Dr. Fermis came over to their house to borrow their alarm clock. And that's probably when they had that test at Trinity sites over in Alamogordo or wherever. Yeah.
Were the people curious about?
Nobody was curious.
Nobody was curious.
We weren't curious at all.
People,
We were just glad to have jobs up there. So no, yeah. Yeah.
okay, now after Trinity site, did anybody say anything or do anything different after the test at Trinity?
No, they didn't do anything there
Okay.
that I remember.
After the war ended, what happened when the war ended? Were the soldiers very happy? Were the citizens very happy?
Well, I think people were so excited and happy that security wasn't very good that night. People were just very, very happy, and they just ran out and yelling and just very happy. Yeah, that's what I remember.
At that time, did you realize that your efforts had gone to build
Yes.
a bomb that ended the war?
At that time, yes, we did.
People were told that, yes, this is what we...
So we contributed a lot, you know. Yeah. Like my father was in charge of the boilers, and he had a crew stoking the fires in the sun apartments, well, all over the hill. And then my sister lived with the Hawkins, and she also worked at the lab, and probably knew a lot more scientists than I did, because she lived with the Hawkins, and they would entertain a lot, and then she got to meet them. And later on, they would come to her house, and she would fix dinner for them. The Ulams, the Marks, and the Hawkins that I remember. Yeah. But she has a lot more stories to tell than I do, because she was older.
Now, during the time that you were working at the lab, after you commuted by truck, Army truck to Los Alamos, how did you get to Los Alamos?
They had buses. Each little community had a bus that people from the valley would drive. Zenobio Lujan was our driver, and we would get up there to what is now a restaurant. And the MP would get on the bus and write our badge numbers. We were only allowed to, later on, we were only allowed to come home once a month. At one time, we were only allowed to come home once a month. That's why we lived on the hill. And one time, this lady from Chimayo was caught coming home more than once a month, and she was reprimanded for it. So they were pretty strict.
What about the road to Los Alamos? What
The-
are your recollections of the road to Los Alamos?
Okay, when we homesteaded, we would go up in a wagon pulled by horses. My dad also had a pickup, but it was very dangerous. The road was very, very bad. And then later on, when we went by bus, I guess the roads were a little better then. But I remember this man from El Rancho was working on the roads, and his equipment turned over and he was killed. Steve Herrera was his name. Yeah.
Did you see big changes in Los Alamos after the war ended?
Yes, we did. I think people were a little more relaxed. And, well, I guess it seemed like people moved around more, transferring from one group to another, which wasn't done that I know of while we were working on the war effort. It was different. The sergeant that I worked for, William McDonald, is still on the hill. I haven't seen him for 60 years, I don't think, but I would like to meet him. I hear that he works for a church at Los Alamos. He's very active in a church there, but I've never tried to contact him. I probably will one of these days before we get any older.
Okay, you continued working at Los Alamos. So.
I continued working at Los Alamos. I worked in SB, Supply and Property, and I worked in W1 for 18 years down in the canyon, where they have the ice house where they stored weapons. I got to go in the ice house, but when I went, they covered everything with black cloths, so I never got to see anything, although we would type the reports about the different shots. And then from W1, I went to work for Frank Harlow in T3, the Fluid Dynamics Group. From T3, I went to the X Division office and worked in the division office as secretary. And then I went on to property management, and I retired as a property administrative specialist when I retired in '89.
What big award were you given while you were working at Los Alamos?
Oh, I got a Distinguished Performance Award. We moved 200 offices. I had to have the computer lines, the telephone lines, the open ports, the closed ports, and everything operational by the time the scientists moved back in their office. And that was one of the reasons I got the Distinguished Performance Award.
What are your thoughts on Los Alamos?
Oh,
Did you enjoy Los Alamos? Did the people from northern New Mexico benefit from Los Alamos?
we benefited a lot, because if we hadn't worked there, our retirements would be very poor, because the jobs were not that available in those days. And my memories of the lab are very good. The people treated me the best I have been treated. They were really, really good to me. Because when I started, I was pretty young, didn't have a lot of experience in office work, and I got a lot of training there, and I did well there. I feel I did well.
And your children, did they benefit from you working in Los Alamos, or they were able to get an education?
Okay, my daughter worked in one of the health groups one summer with, I don't remember what group, but it pertained to, she was going to college. And they had her calling the poison center about different chemicals that she was working with. And she talked to this fellow that said, I will research it and call you back. As it turned out, when she went back to UNM, she did some work at the Poison Center, which is where he worked, and later they got married. So he's a physician at Lovelace in Albuquerque, and my daughter's a pharmacist at the pharmacy manager at Smith, located right across from American Furniture. My son works for the Los Alamos County. He's a pipe fitter foreman And he learned a lot too. He started as a meter reader, and now he's a pipe fitters foreman. He will be retiring at the age of 44 in March. But he also did benefit from our working up there.
And your sisters also worked at Los Alamos during the war and up until
Yeah.
retirement.
Frances Quintana worked at the lab. She started a lot earlier than I did, and she knew a lot more people. And then Viola Salazar, my sister, worked at the report library for many years. We were all there over 40 years, so the lab was very good to us.
When you were living up here during the war, what would a typical day have been like? You got up in the morning?
Well, when I worked for the Gordons, before I went to the lab, she had had a baby, and I would take care of Bobby. And I would wash clothes for him, and I didn't know much about cooking. I cooked one meal, and then Mr. Gordon decided that we would eat our meals out the rest of the time until she came home from the hospital. And now I talked to Leanne, their baby at the time, and she lives in New Jersey. She's a nurse, and she has good memories of Los Alamos also. And Bobby, her son, is in California. He owns his own company. It's a computer company. Yeah. And then after I lived with the Gordons, when I was working at the lab, it wasn't very far. I would walk to the tech area and take the bus from there. The bus picked us up there by the badge office, right across from the tech area. The tech area was here, the badge office. So the buses would stop there and take us to the sites. And then we'd work all day. Sometimes we had to work nights. And we used to have parties at Anchor Ranch, wild parties. I was pretty young. We'd drive in Jeeps up there. It was a lot of fun. But Sergeant McDonald was always very protective of me because I was probably one of the youngest working there. Yeah.
Were there many good places to shop at Los Alamos? You had the PX, you had the commissary.
Well, the older women, I remember there were a lot of Indian women from the Pueblo that would buy a lot of groceries, and we'd be in the bus with all those grocery bags. And then they had one store where you could buy like coats and things like that, some clothes. Not very many places to shop. And of course we didn't have the time, we worked a lot. Not much time to shop. My mother used to do my shopping when I needed clothes because I couldn't really get away that much.
What about recreation at Los Alamos? Did they have theaters? Did they have dances?
Yeah, at the theater they would have dances, and we'd go, and the soldiers would all dance with us. And so it was nice. That's the only thing. Then they had the movies. I hardly ever went to the movies.
Did you ever hear of the soldiers coming to the valley to the different dances?
They would come here to Espanola, and the 4Fers would chase them away. They'd beat them up, and they'd go back to Los Alamos. Because they had the dances at Riverside Hall, where the Block's mortuary is. Yeah.
Did any of the soldiers marry local girls?
A lot of them did. Alexander and Smokey that had the Lamacita, and Jimmy Bridge. Those are some I remember. Yeah.
Did some of the soldiers marry girls from the Federalists?
I never knew of any, but they probably did. Oh, I think Virginia from Santa Clara, she married a soldier. Yeah. I don't remember her last name. Do you know her? She was a famous potter. Ebalacker, yeah. Ebalacker. I think her husband had been a soldier. Those are the only ones I remember.
Well, that's a lot of information.
What, could you tell us maybe one or two of the funniest things or scariest things that happened to you during the war at Los Alamos? Just one or two.
Funniest.
Funny, scary, or unusual?
No, I didn't experience anything like that.
What was it like working with PETN? How much did they tell you about PETN?
Oh, well, it was interesting. I got to see where they processed it when I was washing it with some solution, baking it, sifting it, and then I saw when they put it in the detonators. They had this, like a shield for the one that did it, and she would put the PETN and then lower this thing that would press the PETN. Yeah, that's what I remember. And then we would have safety meetings on Fridays, and we would sit outside on the steps, and they would, some of it was above our heads, the technical part, but we talked a lot about safety. Mm-hmm.
Did you know about the Louis Slotten accident when that happened? Did
Yes.
they tell you much about that?
Yes, I don't know a lot about it, but I heard about it. And then there were people from the valley like Esquivel that was killed at S site.
Yeah, that would happen after the war.
After the war. And then Kelly. I guess
Kelly was around the late 50s, right?
Yeah.
1958, I studied that fatality accident at DP West. Yeah.
Yeah. But
Most of the people from the valley, when they first went to Los Alamos, where did they work? Did they work for the contractors? Who did the contractors hire them originally?
Well,
Robert E. McKee and Laudermill Brothers?
yeah, some of them worked, but a lot of them were with the Zia company. I know Mr. Brown was head of it, and he had worked in Mexico, spoke fluent Spanish, and they had a daughter named Frances. They called her Panchita. And then I think the man that was head of personnel was Mr. Hibbets. Yeah. And I guess the Laudermilks, or the McKees, lived there at El Rancho, some of them. And my uncle had a little cafe, so they would pack lunches for him. And a lot of them worked up there, bus drivers, janitors, and the people that took care of the maintenance of the buildings. A lot of people from Vegas and Colorado were working up there as maintenance personnel. Yeah.